Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar presented by the Balanced Mind Foundation in partnership with Erika's Lighthouse. Peggy Kubert, the Executive Director of Erika's Lighthouse, is going to tell us about the practical guide they developed called Parent Handbook on Child and Adolescent Depression. I am Jessica Jimeno, Online Communications Associate here at the Balanced Mind, and I will be moderating today's webinar, along with Program Manager Nancy Shimon. Joining us is Shira Rader, who will be handling any technical issues you might have related to the webinar and triaging questions for our guest. Before we get started, however, I would like to briefly review 6 housekeeping items. First, we are recording this webinar, and it will be available on our website in our chat and webinar section. Second, all attendees will be muted during the program to prevent background noise or microphone feedback. Third, we will have time for questions at the end of Peggy's presentation. You may submit questions in writing at any time during the program. We will try to get to as many as possible, time permitting. Fourth, to submit your questions, simply type them into the question box on the left-hand side of your screen. Fifth, if you have any technical problems, please let us know through this question box and Shira will assist you. Sixth, just a reminder, a limited number of complimentary handbooks will be available to participants who complete the 8-question post-webinar survey. We are so excited to have Peggy with us today. She has been with Erika's Lighthouse since 2006. She received her BA in Education from Northwestern University and her Master's from the University of Chicago's School of Social Services. She is a licensed clinical social worker and an addictions counselor. In fact, Peggy has over 30 years of experience in working with schools as an educator, trainer, and consultant. She works directly with school staff, administrators, parents, and students to help the community grapple with the complex issues of childhood and adolescent depression. Trained at the Hazelton Foundation, she was one of the first student assistant program trainers in the state of Illinois. These are programs that provide early identification and prevention of substance abuse and mental illness. In addition to being a mom of 3, Peggy also maintains a private clinical practice in Winnetka and facilitates a parent education program called Roots and Wings, raising resilient children in schools on the North Shore of Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us today, Peggy.
Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction, and welcome to everyone. I'm happy to be here with you today. I'd like to begin with a brief introduction about Erika's Lighthouse. Erika's Lighthouse was started 8 years ago when Erika Newkrantz lost her life to depression. Erika was only 14 years old. We dedicate our mission to educating our community, our children, our teachers, our parents, health professionals about childhood and adolescent depression, giving them a vocabulary to talk about this issue, how to find help for themselves, help for their friends, with the hope that we can break the stigma which surrounds this illness so that the children who need help can get the help that they deserve. We have a few guiding messages that are present in the Parent Handbook we're going to be talking about and in all our materials, and we encourage you to embrace these messages. We say depression is a common illness, it's very treatable, there's lots of help out there, go get help because you deserve to feel better. Now, we think these messages are really important for parents to hold close to their heart because it will guide you. It will guide your thoughts and it will guide your actions as you walk down this journey with your child. For example, if you really embrace that this is an illness, then there's going to be no shame involved. There's going to be no blame involved. It's no different than if your child had juvenile diabetes. And because you know this is treatable, you're Your job is laid out for you. Your job as a parent is going to be to find the treatment that's going to be best for your child, to manage the treatment plan, to make sure your child gets the help they deserve to feel better. But we know from the work that we've done over the years that reaching parents to hear these messages is hard. It's hard to reach parents. And so as part of our mission, we published a handbook. Today we're going to be talking about our Parent Handbook on Childhood and Adolescent Depression. It's unique. There is really nothing like it that we have found on the market. It's unique because it's a parent-to-parent guide. It was written by parents who have been down this path before. It's written for parents who may just be starting out on this journey. It contains practical advice on how you can deal with depression, and it has basic information with it on different aspects of depression. It's simply written, it's brief, it can be read in an hour. Now, as you heard, the Balanced Mind Foundation has made a limited number of copies of the handbook available to you. But you can also go to the Erika's Lighthouse website at erikaslighthouse.org and download a copy for yourself off the website. Or if you want your own hard copy or you want to get it to your mother or your child's teacher, you can order multiple copies at Amazon.com. Now, our handbook is divided into two sections, and today we're going to be concentrating on section 1. I want to just start us all out on the same page, however, and by reviewing the definition of clinical depression. At Erika's Lighthouse, we focus on clinical depression, and the definition is very specific. We talk about depression as being a disorder of the brain, and if your brain is not working well, if your brain is sick, it's going to affect your thoughts, it's going to affect your moods, it's going to affect your actions, your behaviors. Now you need to have at least 5 of these symptoms, and you need to have them every day, pretty much all day, for 2 weeks or more. And at least one of the symptoms have to be the first 2 that are highlighted. There has to be a mood of sadness or depression or irritability. But as the audience probably knows, teenage depression looks pretty irritable. That, I would say, is one of the hallmark symptoms of teen depression, and it's something that kids and parents alike don't often recognize as a symptom of depression. But irritability really characterizes the teen's experience. Little or no interest in pleasurable or favorite activities. What that will look like in your child is they've loved soccer from the time they were little, and now they can't even get to practice. They don't want to go to a game. They love their online community. They love hanging out with their friends. They're constantly texting their friends, and now that they just don't want to hang out with anybody. It's not giving up the piano, and they never really loved the piano anyways. So it's something that was really valuable and really important to them that is just, they don't have the energy. They can't participate anymore. And then you have to have at least 4 others of these symptoms, again, 2 weeks or more. And that's the difference between depression and somebody who's just going through a rough patch or a tough time. Now, I want to talk next about how do you get help for your child. Some of you may be well into this process, but some of you may just be starting out. The very first step is to go to the pediatrician because you want to rule out any physical illness. A lot of these symptoms look like other illnesses. It could be a thyroid condition. It could be an autoimmune deficiency. You probably want to jot down in a journal what your concerns are and take it with you to the doctor. This is your documentation. This is your baseline. So for example, you might say something like, I think there's a problem because my daughter is sleeping 16 hours or she's not sleeping at all, and that's not like her. Or something like, this is not my child's normal behavior. My son has no appetite and he typically eats a lot, everything. Or I've seen this type of problem for 2 weeks and now I've got some concern. So you want to have that written down so that you can go in with some accurate information for the pediatrician. The next step will be to get a mental health assessment. It's really important that you have an accurate diagnosis because depression, for example, is going to be treated differently than bipolar disorder. And the assessment will give you the diagnosis. Keep in mind, though, it's often difficult to get an accurate diagnosis because mood disorders can resemble one another. Diagnosing a child can be particularly difficult if they don't have the vocabulary to express what's going on with them. The pediatrician will be a good source to help you find someone to do an assessment. You want someone who has experience working with children or working with teenagers, and the assessment should really inform you of what your next steps are going to be. More than likely, your next step will be to find a therapist. Now, we are often asked, how do you find a therapist that's going to be a good fit for your child? Now, you can get recommendations for a therapist from the pediatrician, maybe from the clergy, maybe from your physician, but other parents who have been through similar circumstances are really going to be your best source for finding a therapist. And you may need to shop around. Not every therapist is going to be right for every child. Some of the therapists you call have a waiting list, and then you're going to ask them who they would recommend. So this can be a lengthy process, finding a therapist. Remember, we think that the first line of treatment is talk therapy, followed by medication if therapy alone doesn't work. Or, for example, if their depression is particularly severe, sometimes a child needs medication just to get out of bed to go see the therapist. The next step will be to interview therapists. And as a therapist myself, people have called me up and had an interview over the phone before they even came to see me. Assemble a list of your therapists, and then you can use this phone interview to narrow down the list. And depending on your child's age, this might be a great way to engage your team. You've had this phone interview. You now have a list of 2 therapists that you think would work well with your teenager. Give the 2 names to your teenager and have your teenager make a phone call and see who they would be comfortable working with. Because engaging in therapy is sometimes a difficult process. So you might want to have some questions prepared ahead of time before you do this initial interview. Something like, how long have you been practicing? What kind of therapy do you practice? How will I know if therapy is working? Do you work with parents? Do you involve the family? Do you have a specific psychiatrist you work with? All of those are good questions to ask. The handbook has a whole list of questions that you might want to use when you interview a therapist. The next step in getting help for your child will really be to begin the therapy process. But you want to set the groundwork ahead of time. You want to enter therapy for your child or for your teen with as much understanding of what's going to happen as possible. So you will make a phone call, or you will ask these questions in the first session, or maybe your teenager will ask some questions like, now what's going to happen during a therapy session? How frequently are we going to meet? What changes in my mood or behavior or symptoms are we as parents going to be looking for to change? When do you expect to see changes? You may want to ask what the family can do to help at home. You may want to ask if the therapist is going to meet with you to discuss progress. You may want to know if the therapist offers homework that your child should be doing. So you want to be comfortable and get just a heads up as to what this is going to be like. If medication is prescribed for your child, you want to ask questions about side effects. What should we do if they occur? What side effects are really serious? And get your concerns and worries out about that with the therapist ahead of time too. We suggest that you check in with your child's therapist, but keep in mind that if you have a teenager in therapy, you may not get a whole lot of information. Start by asking your child how they feel it's going. Do they feel better? Do they like their therapist? Do they think the therapist is helping? Ask the therapist how they think therapy is progressing. Is your child meeting their goals? Do you still agree with the first diagnosis that you received? You know, just kind of get a feel, even if they can't tell you exactly what's going on, if they feel that this is making a difference for your child. And most importantly, ask yourself, do I see improvement in my child's moods, in their thoughts, in their behavior? Are their physical symptoms improving? Is the therapist accessible to me? Is the therapist been accessible to my child? You know, do I think this is helping my child? I think it's really important to mention at this point that if you or your child believes that therapy isn't working, you may want to make a change. You know, not right off the bat is the first therapist going to work necessarily. However, therapy takes time. So don't jump to make a change right away. Therapy is a process. It can be slow going. You may not see improvement right away. Your child may even state that they hate the therapist and they don't want to go anymore. But in fact, that just might mean that some progress is being made and it is difficult. So hang in there for a while unless it's really clear to you that things aren't working. Lastly, we really encourage you to facilitate communication between the therapist, between the school, between any other medical support people that's involved with you, your child, and your family. This is a really important step and will probably only happen if you make it happen. The more collaboration there is between caring adults, the stronger the safety net is going to be around your child. So for example, if the therapist knows that there's been some difficulties at school or at home, the therapist can help her child brainstorm possible strategies to better the situation. Or perhaps if the school knows that there's difficulties or they know your child's on medication, if the school knows that your child is dealing with depression, it can help you with accommodations. Not necessarily an IEP or a 504, but just maybe a little accommodations to their day by giving them a little extra time for an assignment, or maybe rearranging their schedules so that they don't have to be there first period because they're having difficulty getting up in the morning. We really love journaling and would encourage you to keep a journal. And that would maybe include the behaviors, the moods, the symptoms that you're seeing in your child, how their grades are progressing up or down, you know, any medical reports that you want to keep in this journal. You can even give this journal to the therapist. I would encourage you to keep it up during your child's treatment. this becomes the documentation that you have of this journey, and it can show you the progress that's being made, because there's going to be days when it feels like you're questioning if you're making any progress here. So the next thing we want to talk about is a section in the handbook that talks about talking to your child. And no matter what your child's age is, talking to your child about their depression and the treatment that they are going through is going to be a hard conversation to have, and it's a conversation that's probably going to be repeated over time, for a while. It can be emotional. And so as a parent, if you can maintain a tone of compassion, a tone of hopefulness, this is going to help you stay focused. This is going to help you stay grounded. We encourage you to have discussions with your kids, not just about their depression, but in all areas of their life. How's school going for you? How are your friends? How are the outside activities progressing? How are your physical symptoms? Yes, you're going to be talking about how the depression is affecting all of these aspects, but they have a life, and you want to keep talking about their life with them. Be sure to point out any changes that you see in their moods, in their behaviors, especially the positive ones. Maybe they've improved taking responsibility for managing their medication, or maybe they're getting more exercise, or maybe they're focusing a little better on school. This shows your child that you see progress. This shows your child that you see that they're really putting effort into getting better. I like to talk about practicing active listening. Active listening involves finding a quiet, protected space to talk to your child. It means sitting down with them, face to face, eye to eye, and really connecting. That's different than cooking dinner and multitasking and having a conversation with your child. Now, when you really listen to them, though, you need to be prepared as a parent that you may hear things that you don't want to hear. If your child's in pain, it hurts us as well. If your child's in pain, they may want to dump that pain on you. So this is tough stuff. This is tough stuff that you might be listening to. I also want to talk about these last 2 points, choosing your battles and maintaining high expectations for your child. Both of these things are tricky. They're tricky with an adolescent, they're tricky with any child, and they could be particularly difficult with a child who's dealing with a mental illness like depression. Remember, this child, your child with depression, has a lot to deal with. They've got therapy, they've got school, they've got their friends, they're a member of a family. They've got a lot on their plate. Things may be going smoothly, but in any family and with any child, there's going to be some rough spots and there's going to be some battles. Be sensitive to your child's situation. Try to practice empathy and put yourself in their shoes. A child's situation and mood can change in an instant. You know that. For example, let's say your child's had a particularly tough week at school and they just want to chill over the weekend, but you've got plans to go to Grandma's house for dinner and they don't want to go. Now, is this something that you want to have a battle over with? Now, if they've got an alternative plan, they want to chill, they've got a movie, maybe a friend's going to come over for a short time, that may be a plan that you don't want to go to battle over. Stay home, we'll go to Grandma's. Or maybe it's Grandma's 75th birthday and everybody needs to be there and they're going to come with you, and that may be a battle that you have to hold your ground on. but pick your battles because they're going to be them, and you want to maintain your energy. Not everything is worth going to battle over. Holding high expectations for your child. This is tricky for any parent because not every child's going to be a concert pianist. Not every child is going to reach the Olympics just because they're great ice skaters. But we want our child to challenge themselves. We want the best for them. We want our children to be the best person they could be. But not every expectation we have for our child is going to be fulfilled. You know, we want them to be a good member of our family. We want them to help with the dishes, help set the table. But you know, there's going to be days when your kid can't even eat, let alone clear the table and do the dishes. On a bigger level, you may need to let go some of your dreams for them. I will say, though, that maintaining expectations for your child, high expectations, is necessary for them to make forward progress. The message you want to send, the bottom line message you want to send is we believe in you. We believe you can accomplish a great deal and that depression does not need to be an obstacle for you. Yeah, you struggle. We struggle. But you can get through this. Now, there are going to be times when you are angry with your child. Can you imagine that? Or other family members might be angry or frustrated. When anger and frustration erupt in a family, and it always will, I have a suggestion for you to follow to kind of get yourself through this situation. It's something that I love teaching parents. It's called the language of intervention. This is a handy formula for structuring emotional conversations. You can use it with your children, you can use it with your spouse, you can use it with your boss. But basically it spells the acronym DESK. It spells the acronym DESK. You describe the behavior that you see, not what you heard, not what you think is going on, just what you've observed. You express how it makes you feel, you state what you want to see happen, and how you are willing to help. And then you know and communicate the consequences. So let's try this with something like homework. Battles over homework are always common. So, describe the behavior that you see. My darling child, I see that this assignment has been sitting on your desk for the past week, and I happen to notice that it's due on Monday, and it is now Thursday at 8 o'clock at night. What I would like you to do is sit down and get this project started. I want it pretty much finished by Saturday night. I am willing to, oh, I skipped how it makes you feel. So this has been sitting here for a week. You haven't touched it. I'm kind of irritated. I'm a little angry. I'm a little concerned that you've been procrastinating, and I'm really worried that this is going to fall in my lap at 10 o'clock on Sunday evening, and you're going to be asking me to run to Kinko's for you. Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to get started on this project. I am willing to help you. I am willing to sit with you tomorrow all afternoon to get this working and to get this started. But you need to know that if you haven't made serious progress on this, you will not on Saturday night be able to, you will lose your screen time. You will not be able to play on Facebook. You will not be able to play with your Wii. Something that's meaningful to them. So let's try this again with something that's a little harder. Let's say your child's had a meltdown. And you can say, Susie, I just saw you slug your brother. And that makes me really upset and really sad and really angry because we've had this conversation before. You can't hit your brother. What I'd like to see happen right now is for you to go upstairs, Susie, in your room. You are having a little time out here until you can get yourself under control again and come down and apologize to your brother. And if you can't sit in your room, I'll go sit up there with you. Okay, but you need to know that we don't hit in this family. It's not been okay to express yourself that way. And if you come down and hit him again, you're going to be back in your room again, and you may miss your favorite television show. So I think you know, you can play around with this in a lot of different situations. It gives you time to think so that you're not just reacting to a situation. And it's so easy to get started on that laundry list of everything you're frustrated about. This will keep you focused. Just a little point to note here, though, is that this is a balancing act. There may be days when your child can't get out of bed. There may be days when your child can't go to school, let alone do their homework, because they're struggling so much. So not everything needs a consequence. You know, it's just a tough road for us to figure out sometimes as parents. I'd like to talk about talking to other members of the family, the rest of your family, talking about your child's depression with their siblings, with your spouse, with your extended family. Because remember that if your child is dealing with depression, the whole family is going to be affected. The whole family is dealing with depression, and every member of your family may be affected differently and may choose to deal with the situation differently. We encourage you to speak openly about the depression, but before you talk to other family members, you need to think about respecting your child's privacy. Before you especially talk to extended family members and the broader community like your neighbors, ask your child who should know about this and who should not know about this. Ask yourself who's important to know about this, who could be a support person for you. Siblings are often really affected by depression in the family. You know, siblings can get pushed to the side because you're dealing with crises, because you're so focused on getting help for your child. The siblings need to know that they're loved by you, even if they're not getting the same attention. Siblings need to know that, yeah, maybe there's going to be times when you can't bring your friends over because your brother is going through a really rough time, but I will help you find alternative things to do with your friends. Siblings need to remember that their needs and their wishes are important to you too, and that everyone's trying their best to find balance in the family again. Now, some of your children may not have the vocabulary to say how they feel. If they're younger, perhaps, some of your children may not want to burden you by telling you how they're really feeling about this situation. So, parents, you need to initiate this conversation with the siblings. Again, you want to find a protected time. You want to do that active listening where you're really sitting down and having a face-to-face. This is a great opportunity to model for your children I statements. And you could start a conversation by saying, you know, I feel scared sometimes. I feel angry sometimes. I'm really worried about your brother or your sister. How about you? And then you stop talking and you listen. And you listen to what your child has to say to you. And again, you may not like what they have to say to you, but at least they're talking. We also encourage you to try to maintain your normal activities. You know, what did you do for fun before you were so focused on this child and their depression? What does your family enjoy doing? Do you like to go to the movies? Do you go for walks? Do you like ice skating, or do you like to go out to dinner? It's so easy to isolate ourselves and stay cocooned when we've got a crisis in the family or we're struggling with something like depression. Go out, do something for fun, but always have your backup plan because it could fall apart. I want to talk now about taking care of yourself. Taking care of your child is really hard. You are going to need emotional support. You are going to need all the strength that you can muster sometimes to get through this situation with your child. Maybe you're going to find out that you need a therapist to deal with your feelings. Maybe this is the time that you really want to up your own healthy coping skills. Make sure you exercise. Make sure you eat well. Make sure you find quiet time to just pull yourself together. This is the time to gather your support team. You know, maybe it's an online community like the Balanced Mind. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your friends. You know, but be aware that it can sometimes happen that your spouse and you may not be on the same page. Maybe your spouse even blames you for the depression in the family. Maybe you call up your best friend and say, I need to talk to you about what's going on. I'm really struggling. And they can't hear it. They stop returning your phone calls. They just kind of disappear because we all have our own experiences. We all have our own attitudes around depression. And, you know, for some people, stigma still keeps them from even delving into looking at this issue. I go back to encouraging you to keep a journal. Keep a journal of your feelings. Keep a gratitude journal. If you have a gratitude journal, find one little thing that you're grateful for every day. This can help reinforce a mindset that's going to help you through this journey. And it will be a great model for your children as well. I want to end with talking about happiness. This is what every parent wants for their child. But when your child is dealing with a mental illness like depression, we also want them to be resilient so that they can manage the illness if it occurs again, manage the rough spots that are going to definitely occur from time to time. And as parents, we can teach them some of the skills to be resilient. Relationships, I think, are key to being resilient. We want our kids to have strong relationships. We want our children to develop these healthy relationships with people who believe in them. We want them to know that there are people out there for them. We want to teach them to ask for help. And we can teach them how to connect, because for some kids, they need to learn. How do you make eye contact? How do you reach out? How do you ask for help? But one of the keys to being resilient is knowing that there are people there for you. We want our children to believe that they have a positive future, that they can learn how to set goals for themselves, that they can take baby steps to achieve those goals, and we can help them with that. We can help our children learn how to problem solve and make good decisions. And maybe those decisions are about friends and, gee, should you really go to the sleepover when you know if you stay up too late you really have a difficult time the next day? Or solving problems. You know, even little children can solve problems like, gosh, I know you don't want to wear your coat today, but it's 30 degrees out there. You'll probably be happier wearing a coat. So we can model this for our kids. We can teach our kids how to do this. We want our children to have a sense of self-esteem, a sense of self-worth, and that comes from being good at something. Everyone is good at something. We just may have to keep searching till we find what our child is good at. You know, maybe it's their art. Maybe it's their writing skills. Maybe they're just a really, really good friend. Maybe they have a sport they excel in, or computer skills. We want to teach our children to be empathetic, to be able to put themselves in someone else's shoes. That's a huge piece of being resilient. And we want them to develop a sense of humor. We want them to be able to laugh at themselves, to laugh at the silly mistakes we as parents are going to make, and to not take everything so seriously. We want to let our kids know that we believe in their future, that they are loved, that they will get better, and they are going to have a fine life. Thank you. That's the presentation, and now I believe we're going to be able to answer some of your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Peggy. Before we get into some of the great questions people have presented, I just want to remind everyone that we have a limited number of complimentary handbooks that will be available to participants who complete the 8-question post-webinar survey that you will be getting as soon as you exit the webinar. And now we'll look at some of the questions people have. One question is, can severe depression in a child lead to lack of empathy? And if so, how do we teach the child to have feelings for other people?
Wow, that's a really good question. Yeah, a child who is severely depressed, is just not thinking about other people at the time. And the sense of empathy, of being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, is going to come with little teachable moments. Little teachable moments like when your child, has a meltdown and maybe, for example, hits their sister, as the example that I used, and to take that moment and say, honey, can you imagine how that feels for your sister? Or, to use the moments that occur in your day right then and there that you can point out and make a connection for your severely depressed child to say, now how do you think that child feels? Watching television is filled with teachable moments. Maybe they could sit and chill and watch a show with you and you could say, how do you think that character would feel? That's some examples of how to start to build empathy.
Okay, thanks. Another question is, what do you do if your teen is very withdrawn? How do you draw out a teen who doesn't want to include parents in his life or blames his parents for his problems?
Well, that doesn't have to be a depressed teen. That sounds like all teens to me, too. Look, engaging, they're uncomfortable. They don't feel well. They're going to blame you. That's probably going to happen. And also developmentally isolating, and it's not necessarily isolating, but wanting to become independent is very much developmentally on track with adolescence. So there is going to be a separation. The question is, can they connect with anybody? Boys in particular don't necessarily have a lot of feeling vocabulary, but things like perhaps a journal for them. Rip up some magazines, put some pictures in a magazine, from a magazine into some sort of collage. Get them out and get them active. So maybe maybe they used to play basketball. Do something physical. Take your child for a walk, and maybe it just might be one question. So how's therapy progressing? How are your friends? One expectation is that your teenager is a member of your family, and they do need to surface every once in a while and talk to you, even your child who has depression. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas. But developmentally, so you're up against the depression as well as developmental markers that say your child is well into their adolescence and they're going to be separating from you.
Along those lines, we have another question. When a teen is in therapy, how much information can the therapist give the parent? Can a teen request that certain information not be shared with the parents?
Yeah, they can. Part of what goes on in therapy is this rule of confidentiality that, a therapist, to make this work, or child or who's ever in therapy has to feel like the information that they share is really protected and safe, and that my therapist is not going to call up my mom or dad and tell them everything that I've been talking about. At the same time, if your therapist is hearing from your child that their symptoms are progressing and now they're thinking about hurting themselves, or they have been hurting themselves, or they're thinking about hurting somebody else, or things just aren't doing well, they also are really required to pull you in at that time. So a conversation and setting that groundwork for therapy might be, how much are you going to share with me? And you, of course, are going to tell me if things are going south and not working out well, and get that up front. That's a great question to ask the therapist before therapy begins.
Okay, another question we have is, using the analogy of depression being an illness like diabetes, can you elaborate on using therapy prior to medications? With diabetes, one wouldn't start with therapy as an intervention. One would start with medication. Are you making a distinction between non-clinical depression, using therapy first, and clinical depression, medication first? I worry that if a child is severely depressed, they may not be able to engage in therapy, and without medication, the results may be tragic.
I totally agree that for a child who is severely depressed, you are not necessarily going to wait for them to engage in a therapeutic relationship, which may take a few weeks. You're probably going to put them on medication right away. At the same time, I also feel that, let's go back to the analogy of diabetes. Medication may not be the first step for a diabetic. You're going to change your lifestyle. You're going to eat better. You're going to exercise more. And then if your blood sugar isn't being managed well, then you may need medication. Same thing's true for depression. You may change your lifestyle. You may be talking to a therapist and learn how to cope with your feelings a little bit better. You may exercise more, eat better, and then you may still need medication. It is a process, but look, medication can be a lifesaver, and if you've been told, let's medicate this kid because we have to save their life, and then we'll talk about underlying issues or what else is going on, I think that makes a lot of sense. Trust your gut as a parent.
Another question is, can depression be more intense at times? My 14-year-old son has many times where his moods seem situational and are displayed through angry outbursts.
Sure. I mean, depression is cyclical. It can come and it can go, and there's going to be times when they're managing their feelings, they're managing their emotions, their behaviors really well, and then there's going to be times when they might be physically run down, they might be more stressed out at school, their brain just isn't working well because of the depression, and they may be more reactive, they may be more sensitive, they may be not sleeping well. So sure, it can ebb and flow in terms of the severity of the symptoms that you're going to observe.
Another question is, have you ever worked with neurofeedback? If so, how do you feel about this as a tool?
As a therapist, I've personally don't do neurofeedback. I know of people who have. One of the really cool parts of the Parent Handbook is that we do talk about alternative therapies and adjunct therapies in the second section of the Parent Handbook. And neurofeedback, I mean, teaching your kids how to, if I understand neurofeedback correctly, it's teaching your kids how to relax themselves. That's a little more biofeedback, but how to recognize their impulses and to begin to control their breathing, their thoughts. And look, whatever tool's effective, but I think as parents, we can run around looking for the cure, the next thing that's going to, fix this child's depression, and just check things out carefully, because we spend an awful lot of money on therapies that maybe don't do a whole lot. But the second section of the Parent Handbook definitely talks about alternative therapies, and there's lots of research that shows that meditation and yoga and breathing, and certainly exercise, because it changes our endorphins in our body, really can make a difference in someone's depression.
Another question is, how do you address depression when your child is in denial and is not willing to accept that there is something wrong?
Oh, that's a great question. And That's why I love keeping a journal to begin to document what you see. And you can say to your child, sweetheart, I'm not a doctor. I'm not sure what's going on. But over the past couple of weeks, you have stopped eating. You are not doing your homework. You have just been really irritable and moody. And I'm not sure what's going on, but I do know something is going on. So let's go to the doctor and check it out. I'm worried that you are sick. I'm worried maybe you have mono. Let's go find out what's going on. And you know, the bottom line is you're there to protect their physical and mental well-being, and you're obligated to take them to the doctor. So, honey, I know you don't want to go, but I can't diagnose what's going on with you. Let's go find out what it is.
Great.
You know, you don't try to diagnose them. Take them to the doctor.
Okay. Thank you. Another great question is, when you talk about therapy, are you referring to CBT, DBT, or some other form of therapy, or are you just referring to therapy in general? Can you briefly comment on the different types of therapy used in treating teens?
Great question. Yeah, I was just kind of using therapy generically, but CBT has found to be very effective, cognitive behavioral therapy that will help your children change their thoughts, which will ultimately help them change their moods. Dialectic behavior therapy, I think, is really effective, particularly with children who are injuring themselves, who have been at higher risk for suicide, because it helps you manage your moods. It gives you a lot of skills, not only to check your thinking, but to regulate your emotions, to create healthy relationships. You know, those are the two forms of therapy that really have been shown to be most effective in dealing with depression. So I was kind of referring to therapy in general, but again, it's great questions for your therapist. You know, the therapist that you're interviewing, what kind of therapy do you practice? How are you going to help make a difference in their thoughts and their actions, as well as their moods and and to improve the quality of their life, because we want my child to feel better.
When a child threatens to kill himself in the midst of rage or an angry outburst, how does one know if this is depression or bipolar disorder?
Well, you know, as I said, that's really difficult to tease out depression or bipolar disorder. And, you know, a child who is depressed may threaten to kill themselves. A child who has bipolar disorder may threaten to kill themselves. You know, and again, I think anytime a child says, I'm going to take my life, you have to take that seriously. And what I've coached parents to say is, honey, we don't, you know, that really concerns me when I hear you say that. And what I'm going to do right now is we're going to get in the car and we're going to the emergency room. If you really feel like you're going to take your life, I can't let that happen. Get in the car and we're going to go. And they may just say, oh, forget it, you know, and go upstairs. But, you know, once a child has made an attempt, they're at a higher risk for making an attempt again. So if you know that your child has made an attempt, whether it's bipolar or depression, you've got a kid who's at higher risk. So you take those threats seriously. And we coach teens, when we talk to teens, to take those threats seriously. Because God forbid you just say, oh, well, they're serious, you know, they're just joking around. And, you know, maybe your sibling, maybe your child's sibling is holding that information and doesn't say anything. And, oh, my God, if there's a tragic loss, that would just be horrible. So you need to know that information.
Okay, another question is, I have a very hard time finding a therapist for my child and myself. I've used the Balanced Minds database and asked for word-of-mouth recommendations. You mentioned calling and interviewing a potential therapist. Can you offer any other suggestions?
for finding a therapist, suggestions for finding a therapist. You know, it can be really, really hard to find somebody, you know, perhaps that, you know, is covered by insurance that you can pay for. You know, I would, and because depression and mental illnesses often are not talked about, you may not know which friends in your community have a therapist that they've been going to. Maybe clergy, you know, maybe, you know, an adolescent physician, an adolescent behavioral specialist may give someone, you know, and it could be somebody at a family service agency that your child connects with, or somebody in a youth service agency. But it's a process, and it's hard, you know. And again, if you get a copy of the Parent Handbook, there's a lot of questions that you can ask a therapist till you find a good fit for yourself and your child. But it does take some looking around and asking for recommendations from people who have gone before you.
This is Nancy Shimon. I was going to interrupt for just a minute and add one more thing to that question. There is a good organization that Dr. Mary Freistad has used, and I don't know if we have it up on our website, but if not, I'll make sure that we add it in the resources section. So in a day or two, if you want to look in our section under the Learn area, and then resources under therapists, I'll make sure that we have links, and there's some databases of therapists there that might be helpful.
That's great, thanks.
Along those lines, about that question, in your opinion, is it okay or is it not okay if a parent and that parent's child see the same therapist?
You know, every therapist is going to have a different view on that. I actually kind of like it if the therapist is giving you parenting skills that can help you cope with your child's situation, because they know what your child is going through, and they may know some of your child's triggers that come from you as their parent and can give you some tips on how to manage the home situation. You know, I do like that model. On the same at the same token, if you know there's been a lot of conflict and your child says, you know, Mom, I don't want you to go to my therapist. This is my therapist. You go find your own therapist. Then I think you really need to respect that.
Another question is, we have tried a variety of different medications for our daughter and have yet to find the right one to address her severe mood swings. Her symptoms include anger, aggression, defiance, and bursts of sadness. Have you had an experience with this collection of symptoms? She is 7.5. If so, what helped?
Oh, she's so young. I'm sorry that you have to go through that. You know, I wish I could say that medicine is an exact science. It isn't. You know, it really is trial and error to find something that's going to work for your child. That collection of symptoms that you mentioned, Jessica, you know, I'm not sure. It could be bipolar. It could be, you know, it could be, a number of things. But again, a mental health assessment is so critical in getting a diagnosis that's clear, and the diagnosis should not just be a label. Oh, your kid's got bipolar, or your kid's got depression. A diagnosis should lead you to the treatment that's going to be most effective in getting your child to a stabler place, you know, to a happier place, to a more even keel place. And if you're not getting the answers you want, go find somebody else. Go, you know, and nobody wants to hear, oh my God, we have to start over again. But you're not starting the same place. You've got more data about what's worked, what hasn't worked. But you wanna try to manage it as best as you can. So I can't really diagnose the daughter over the telephone.
Okay, I'm going to ask 2 more questions. The first is, as parents, how do we balance giving our children privacy, for example, not reading their journals, and the need to be in the know in case they have suicidal thoughts or ideations? When do we snoop, and when do we say hands off?
Oh, I love that question. You know what? When your child has a mental illness, I think it's fair game to snoop. I really do. I mean, and I'm a huge believer in mother's guts. You know, if your gut is telling you, I don't think something's right, then chances are something may not be right, and I would snoop, snoop, snoop. You know, just be careful to cover your tracks. It's important for your child to have a sense of their autonomy and a sense that, you know, my world is private. But if they have made an attempt, if you get the feeling that things are not going well in therapy, and this might even be a question for a therapist, just to say, you know, you need to tell me if my child's at high risk for hurting themselves, because I need that information only so I can be working with you to look for some of these clues. But yeah, you know, my kids don't like it, but I would say snoop.
Okay. The last question is about friendship. Friendships can be very difficult for our kids when their self-esteem is low. How do we help them develop good friendships and not gravitate to kids who are on the fringe and involved with drugs? Can we make the depression worse by keeping our child from questionable friendships?
Oh boy, you know, everybody wants to make sure their kids are connected up with good friends. Yeah, so the question was, can you make it worse by keeping them away from friends that your kids are gravitating to? Is that kind of the gist of the question, Jessica?
Yeah, is it a good idea to get involved? Is it going to make things worse if I get involved?
You know, that's one of those choose your battles kind of things. You know, if you sense that these are kids that are really, you know, if you know that these kids are drinking, if you know these kids are drugging, obviously if you've got a kid on medication that's got an illness that affects their brain, we really want to try to minimize their exposure to kids who are drinking and drugging. But this is a teenage problem. As soon as mom says, I don't like your friends, that's their best friend in the whole world. So if we can create opportunities for our children to meet other people that you think are like-minded, if you've got a network of friends that you know really don't take their, you know, allow their kids to be drinking or drugging, maybe you can set up some environment where these kids kind of meet. I mean, this is tough stuff, but if you do find out that your kids are drinking and drugging and they're on medication and they're struggling with depression, I mean, that's a conversation where you can use that desk model, which is, you know, I've seen you using. I know you're on medication and this really scares me. This is going to change. And, you know, there's going to be some limits on who you see, and then hold firm. It's tough. It's tough for any parent, whether you're dealing with depression or not.
Before we conclude, I actually have one final question, and that is, what recommendations can you offer to spouses who have differing viewpoints on how to parent and approach their child, particularly when the child is an adult, say, in his or her 20s?
Well, you know, often spouses are not on the same pages when they're you know, parenting their kids. You know, if you've got, you know, an older child, you may not have, you know, your journal with all this data, because that's a great tool for turning it back on your spouse and going, okay, well, I see this, this, and this. What do you think is going on here, and how do you want to handle it? You know, parenting an adult child who's, you know, maybe in the house or maybe out of the house is tricky. You know, you may need to go, you know, to a therapist. You may need to go to a therapist and say, you know, our parenting skills with this adult child need some tuning up. I mean, we're on different pages, you know, and involved a therapist or a clergy or some other trusted adult to kind of think through, is the conflict in your parenting skills helping this adult child of yours or your teenager, or do we need to be a little more of a united front, and where can we compromise and how do we do that? Putting your child's best interest.
So find a neutral third party,
yeah,
perhaps. Okay, so thank you, Peggy. That was really great. We learned so much, And we just want to remind everyone that you should complete the 8-question post-webinar survey, which you'll get when you exit. And for people who complete it, there is a limited number of complimentary handbooks that we'll be giving. Is there anything you'd like to say, Peggy?
Well, just thank you for the opportunity. I hope all of you who get a copy of the handbook really enjoy it, or just take a look at it on our web and read it at your leisure.
And later on, the recording of the webinar should be available in the chat and webinar section of the Balanced Mind Foundation's website. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and have a nice day.